This lesson, we're creating a drag and drop, so on this unordered list. So any of the page elements that are going to be containing the class of draggable and draggable to attribute are going to be draggable elements. So it's very dynamic, and we're simply selecting all of those elements and adding the functionality to them. And that's what's coming up in this lesson. Go ahead and open up the HTML file, and we're going to create some draggable items here. So in list items, and we're going to have 4 different items there that are going to be draggable. And then let's go into our styling in order to add some styling to the draggable elements. So the element with class of draggable, let's add some padding to the element. So I'm going to add 8 pixels of padding. We'll do a margin of 4 pixels. And a background color, and keeping it grayscale, and then also a border. And then for the cursor, we're going to set it as move. So that gives us some styling, and it makes it look more appealing to be more draggable. And then within dragging, so whenever we've got an element with the class of dragging, we're going to set the opacity to be 0.5. So whenever it's being dragged, just set the opacity. So the rest we're going to do with JavaScript. We're going to handle the element dragging. So starting by selecting the document object and then adding an event listener. And the event that we're listening for is going to be the DOM content loaded. So this is going to fire off every time that the DOM content has finished loading. So all the page elements are ready to be used. Let's select the items using the document and query selector. And we're going to select all. So we're going to select all the elements with a class of draggable. And that should grab all of the ones with the class of draggable. You can just go back and just confirm class name. So these are the ones that we're selecting here, class of draggable. And just make sure that I don't have any spelling mistakes there. And now let's select the drag source element, and we're going to set that as default to be none. And then using a function, we're going to handle. So we'll give this function a name of handle drag start. So that's what we're going to be doing, and capturing the event objects of the element and setting the drag element source as whatever the element this is. So whatever one is within the event object as this. And so the data transfer, and the effect that we're allowing is going to be the move and the E transfer set data. The values for this are going to be text and HTML. And using this inner HTML to get the inner HTML of the element. And this class list add, and we're adding dragging into it while it's being dragged. Add in the other functions. So another function that we need is handle the drag over, selecting the event object there. And if event prevent default, then we're just going to E prevent default to remove the default action. And let's just move the bracket over there for the condition. And otherwise, we're going to return false. And I'll go through all of the code afterwards. So once we set this up, then I'll give you a demonstration, and then we can go through all the lines of code in more detail. So now we're adding the handle drop, selecting the event object as well. So this is going to allow us to handle the dot drag end. So handle the drag end. So setting up all of the functions that we need in order to manage the movement of the elements. And once it's ended, we take the class list and remove the class of dragging. So also whenever we're doing the drop, so let's make sure that our drag source element is not equal to whatever the current one is. So that way we're not dropping the same one into the one that we're in. And drag source element inner HTML is going to be equal to whatever this inner HTML is. And this inner HTML is going to be data transfer, and we're just doing a get data, and the data that we're getting is going to be the text HTML data. And if none of those conditions, then we're just going to return back false. So let's see what happens. So now we've got our elements here on the page, and we need to still add the events onto the elements. So we're going to iterate through the items, and so for each one we're going to attach all of these events handlers to. So for each one of the items that we had selected here as draggable, that have a class of draggable, we're iterating through, selecting the item and adding an event listener. So if the event is drag start, then we're attaching the method handle drag start. And then we've got the 4 other event listeners that we need to add, and we'll just update those. So the next one is the drag over, and we've created a function to handle drag over. We have a handle to handle the drop, so update this to event listener to the drop. So handle drop function. And then the last one is we've got the drag end, where it removes out the class. So we need to handle drag end. And one last look at the code, and actually this should be an equal sign, not a dash. So double check the code and let's try it out. So refresh, and now we can drag and drop any one of the elements that has that class of draggable. So just to go over what the code is and what it does. So let's do a quick review of the code. So we've got DOM content loaded just right here at the top. So this is an event when the DOM content is loaded. Basically ensures all the DOM elements are fully loaded before the script runs. We're selecting all the elements that have the class of draggable, and so we can use these elements and we're going to be reordering them. So we want to create some functions, and these functions could be added to all of those elements that have the class of draggable. So first we want to handle the start. So this function is triggered and the user starts dragging the item. So it stores the dragged element sets into the move. So this is where it's storing it while it's being moved, and then it's dragged the item in the data transfer object, and then it's dragged over visually, distinguishing it from the other elements. So we're adding in that dragging class. So the drag over, so this function here allows for the dragged item to be dropped, so calling the ePrevent default. So without this, the event, the drop won't be triggered. So it's gonna not be triggered if it doesn't have that. So that's where we added that in. And then we've got the handle drop. So this is one of the most important ones. So when this is dragged, the item is dropped into another item and the function is triggered. So it prevents the event from bubbling up and checks to see if the item dropped onto the different from the one that is being dragged. So that's this condition right here that's doing the check. And if so, it swaps the content from the dragged item to the dropped one, and effectively reordering the list. So this is what this is happening over here, where it's transferring the data. And then the last one here is when the drag ends, we're just simply removing out the dragging class. So that removes out that kind of one where we've got the opacity class that's in there. And then we're adding in the event listeners for each one of the elements. So this is very dynamic, because this means that if we have any other items here that are draggable within the list, will automatically add in the same functionality into them.